So let's just take a moment to make sure that our motivation for being here this morning, participating in this session, is as positive as possible. So if you're comfortable with the idea of becoming enlightened, fully enlightened Buddha, to help all living beings, so bring that up into your mind or remember it if you generated it already earlier this morning. And feel the wish that this session will help us reach enlightenment more quickly, help us create the causes to become a fully enlightened Buddha, to help all living beings throughout space. But if that seems like a very high, far away, difficult goal for you, you're not quite sure if you're ready to aspire for that, then you can simply wish that you will learn something in this session that will help you in your life to be a better person, happier, more peaceful, and to be able to share that positive energy with others. Make your life really meaningful and beneficial for others as much as you can. So good morning, or afternoon, or evening, wherever you may be. And happy 4th of July. So this is an important day in America, although I don't know how many people really remember the significance of it. A lot of people just have fun, have picnics and barbecues and shoot off fireworks. But in a way, it's auspicious that we're spending this day doing what we're doing, because it's Independence Day. It's the day commemorating the time when America became free of being under the control of another country. And so what we're doing in this retreat, not just today, but for the whole week, is the practice of Tara. And the word Tara, it's a Sanskrit word, means liberator, one who liberates. She herself is liberated, free, and then she works to liberate others. And of course, everybody wants to be free. Nobody likes being tied up or locked up or oppressed, controlled by others, not having the freedom to do what we want, and so on. So it's really important to have freedom. But normally people think of freedom in a more, kind of coarse way, gross way, like just being able to go where we want and do what we want and so on. But from the Buddhist point of view, freedom is internal, mental freedom. Freedom means our mind being free from ignorance that sees things in a mistaken way, and other disturbing attitudes like anger, attachment, fear, jealousy. So there's all these mental states, afflictive mental states, that most of us are not free from without choice. They pop up in our mind and make our mind disturbed and unhappy, and then they influence our behavior, so that we sometimes do things that make others disturbed and unhappy and create karma that leads to more suffering and problems in the future. So ordinary beings, unenlightened beings like me and probably some of you, if not all of you, we are not really free in that sense. But we can become free. And that's the real purpose of the whole Buddhist path, the Buddhist teachings, is to free ourselves from these bonds, these chains of disturbing thoughts and emotions, so that we can enjoy real, genuine peace and happiness and real liberation, not have to suffer anymore, not have to die and take rebirth anymore, and free to benefit others, help others to become free as well. So here we're learning how to do that through the practice of Tara, and also through looking at the 9th chapter of Shantideva's text, The Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, because this chapter is about wisdom, and that is the thing that frees us, wisdom that understands the true nature of all phenomena. So if we really want to be free, we need to understand wisdom, develop wisdom in our mind. So it's quite significant that we are doing Tara practice and also looking at this text, the 9th chapter. So so we're very fortunate that we have the chance to do that. Also, in a couple of days is the Dalai Lama's birthday, his 85th birthday. We'll do some special prayers for that. But I was thinking, this text, the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, is one of His Holiness's favorite texts. He teaches it a lot. He quotes from it a lot in all his talks and teachings. And so it's a source of inspiration for him. And I'm sure that if he knew that we were studying this text, he'd be very pleased, very happy. So it's like a birthday present, the best birthday present we could give to His Holiness, that we're trying to understand this text. So this morning, we'll start looking at this text. And so of the handouts, files that you should be able to download from the internet, hopefully you've already done so, what we'll be using is one file. Actually, I numbered the files. 01. So 01 is Shantideva's chapter 9 with the outline. So we'll be using that. This is a translation of just the verses of chapter 9. And then file number 02 is a commentary to chapter 9. Now, we're not going to be reading through that, but it's just there for you to use as you wish. This is a commentary. There's many commentaries. This one is by Drakpa Gyaltsen, and he was a lama, a Gelugpa lama in the 18th, 19th century. There's another Drakpa Gyaltsen you may have heard of. One of the texts we recite here is called Parting from the Four Attachments or the Four Clingings. So that's a different Drakpa Gyaltsen. That one is a Sakya, and he lived a few centuries earlier. So this is a different Drakpa Gyaltsen. He's called Abbot Drakpa Gyaltsen because he was the abbot of a monastery in northeastern Tibet, Amno area. Anyway, it's a nice commentary, a little bit shorter than Gyaltsabje's, which the residents here already have, because Venerable Children has started teaching this text from chapter 1. She's already completed chapter 1 and partway through chapter 2. So those teachings have been happening on Thursday mornings, and anyone who's interested can, watch those. And so there we're using Gyaltsabje's commentary, which is somewhat longer and more complicated. This is a little bit shorter, I think. And then the third file, number 03, is called Supplementary Notes. This is just something I put together, and we will use that starting from today. So if you could get that file on your screen so you can look at it. So I thought to start by just talking about Shantideva, because some of you who are following this may not be familiar with Shantideva and this text. So just looking at that a little bit. And apparently there's not much information about Shantideva. I think in the early days of Indian Buddhist history, they weren't so good about keeping track of dates. So scholars sort of guess that he lived in the late 7th to middle 8th centuries of the Common Era. Those are his approximate dates. And he was a Buddhist monk and philosopher and poet who lived, studied, and taught at Nalanda Monastery. Nalanda Monastery is one of the great Buddhist monasteries in India. Now it's just in ruins. You can still go and see the ruins. It's quite beautiful, actually. But the Dalai Lama often talks about the Nalanda tradition. There's this monastery. I don't know how long it existed, quite a few centuries. And there were great masters, great scholars who lived and studied and taught at Nalanda Monastery. His Holiness identified 17, there were many others, but 17 important ones for Tibetan Buddhism, because their writings, their texts, are the foundation for our studies in the Tibetan tradition. For example, Nagarjuna, Chandrakirti, Shantideva, Vasubandhu, Asanga. So these were some of the great Nalanda masters whose works we study. And then he's considered to be a follower of the Madhyamaka school of tenets. So there are different schools of philosophy that we identify, the Tibetans identify anyway. And this gets quite complicated. But yeah, the school that's considered to be the most correct, most accurate by most Tibetan Buddhist practitioners, scholars and practitioners, is the Madhyamaka school. And Nagarjuna is credited with being the founder of that school, based on the Buddhist teachings, of course. But Nagarjuna's text pulled out the meaning of emptiness, emptiness of inherent existence, from the Buddha's sutras, and clarified those teachings. So he's said to be the founder of the Madhyamaka school. And then later masters such as Chandrakirti and Bhavaviveka, Buddha Palita, and Shantideva are considered to be followers of that. And I put here considered because I don't know if you look at Shantideva's works, if you'll ever find anything where he says, I'm a Madhyamaka. I follow Nagarjuna. I mean, not that I've looked at all of his works, but this is what the Tibetans believe. The Tibetans, looking at his text and the way he explains things, they consider him to be a Madhyamaka. And within Madhyamaka, there's two traditions, the Svatantrika and the Prasangika. So Chandrakirti's, Shantideva is considered to be Prasangika. And then two texts were authored by him, the Bodhicharyavatara, which is the one we're looking at here, engaging in the Bodhisattva's deeds. It's also sometimes translated as Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. There's actually many different translations of this text. And at the end of these notes, I've listed a few that are available in English. There are others. And so the different translators sometimes translate the title differently. But Bodhicharyavatara, that's standard. How you translate it into English can vary. And then another text he translated he wrote is the, I don't know how to say it, but Shiksha Samuchaya, Compendium of Trainings. That one is less well known. I think there are a couple of translations into English, but I haven't studied it. It doesn't seem to be studied so much in our tradition. But the Bodhicharyavatara is very, very popular in Tibetan Buddhism. Probably all the schools of Tibetan Buddhism, Nyingma, Sakya, Kagyu, and Gelug, study it and have their own commentaries to it. So you could really spend a lot of time studying this text and all the different commentaries and different translations and so on. But yeah, anyway, so that's just a very brief biography. You can go online and find more information about Shantideva if you wish to. There's also a story about Shantideva. Probably many of you have heard it, but I'll tell it for those who haven't. It said that when he was at Nalanda, he was a student at Nalanda Monastery, and the other monks saw him doing just three things: eating, sleeping, and going to the toilet. They didn't see him engaging in a lot of study or debating and so on and so forth. So they thought he was kind of lazy, good for nothing. And some of them thought, he doesn't really belong here. We should get rid of him. He's not living up to what he should be doing in this monastery. So they came up with a plan. They thought they'll ask him to give teachings, and that will be very shameful for him because he won't know what to say. He'll kind of make a fool of himself. So he accepted their invitation. And then they did another kind of tricky thing. They built a seat, a throne for him that was very, very high, and they didn't put any steps there for him to get up on the throne. So the day arrived, and many people had gathered, to listen to these teachings. And he came along, and then just like that, he was on top of the throne. He didn't need the steps to get up there. He just got up on the throne and sat on the throne. And then he started talking. And what he spoke was this text, the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, engaging in the Bodhisattva's deeds. So it just kind of flowed out of his mouth. And of course, everybody was, wow, astonished, astounded. And then it said, too, that when he got to the 9th chapter, and, was talking about emptiness, his body just started to float in space. So, yeah, that's the story. How much of it is true or not, we don't know. But anyway, it's a cool story. And that's the origin, the background of this text, where it came from. So before we get into the 9th chapter, I thought it would be nice to just do an overview of the whole text. Some of you may have read it or studied it before, but some of you may not have. So it's good to know just what is contained in the text. And it's actually a text that is not really suitable for beginners, people who don't know anything about Buddhism. If this is the first text you read, you might feel a bit lost. So it assumes that the reader, the listener, already knows quite a bit about the basic Buddhist teachings, such as the Four Noble Truths and explanations about karma, the nature of samsara, cyclic existence, and how this is a situation that's very unsatisfactory and imperfect, and we need to get ourselves out of it. And on top of that, this is a text of the Mahayana tradition, in which our goal is not just to free ourselves from cyclic existence and all its sufferings, but to help all other beings as well to be free. And to do that, to be able to help other beings be free of samsara, cyclic existence, we need to bring ourselves to this state of enlightenment, of Buddhahood. We need to become Buddhas. So our goal in the Mahayana tradition is that, attaining full enlightenment or awakening, Buddhahood, to be able to help all other living beings. So the text actually starts from that point. So ideally, to really make sense of the text and fully appreciate what he's saying in it, it is good to have some background in basic Buddhist teachings, the foundations, such as the Four Noble Truths. Also good, if possible, to have knowledge of the Lam Rim, the stages of the path to enlightenment, which is a very kind of the basis of our studies, and at least in the Gelugpa tradition. to have an understanding of and a practice of the path to enlightenment. This is what we base that on, the Lam Rim. So that's why I did recommend that anyone who follows this course, at least have some acquaintance with the basic teachings and practices of Buddhism, in particular Mahayana Buddhism. But you can always go back and do that afterwards. My own learning in Buddhism, I started off, back in the 70s when I started learning Buddhism, there weren't many books available in those days. There weren't many opportunities to learn Buddhism. And I went to India and Dharamsala, and I started going to classes at the Tibetan library in Dharamsala. And the teacher was already partway through, I think he was teaching, what's it called? The Jewel Ornament of Liberation, which is similar to the Lam Rim. It's from the Kagyu tradition, written by Gampopa, a great Kagyu master. So it's kind of like the Lam Rim, and very, very beautiful text. So he was partway through that, and that was my first introduction to, to Buddhism. But I loved it. I was just soaking it in and wanting to know more and more and more and more. So I kind of came in the middle of something, not really right, Buddhism for dummies or ABCs of Buddhism. But it still worked for me. And then, I filled in the gaps along the way. So it's fine, to start your Buddhist studies with something a little bit advanced, and then later go back and learn the more basic things. Okay, so in the notes, the supplementary notes, there's an overview of this text, going through what's contained in each chapter. So chapter 1 is called Explanation of the Benefits of Bodhicitta, the Mind of Enlightenment. So bodhicitta, we tend to use that term, even though it's Sanskrit, but it's just kind of simple. And it's sometimes translated as the mind of enlightenment or the awakening mind, different ways of translating it. But it means the aspiration to become enlightened, to become a Buddha, in order to benefit all living beings. And that's really important, to not think that our goal in becoming enlightened is so that we can be this great, wonderful, knowledgeable, experienced, fantastic being and enjoy ourselves just for our own sake. But it's only for the sake of all other living beings. So it's actually said that the process of developing that state of mind is that you first develop the aspiration to help others. You see that sentient beings are suffering, and you're so moved by their suffering. You feel so much compassion for that. You want to help them. And then you think about, well, how can I help them? What's the best way to help them? And in researching that, you realize, becoming enlightened, becoming a Buddha, that's the best way to help them. So this takes some time, of course, to come to that. But, your goal is right from the beginning, benefiting others. And you realize bringing yourself to the state of enlightenment is the best way to do that, the best way to benefit others. So you really should be free of self-centeredness, your own ego, your own self-gain. That should be out of the way. But on the other hand, it is the best thing we can do for ourselves. Reaching enlightenment is, the way to free ourselves from all our suffering and problems and limitations and so forth. So it is the best thing we can do for ourselves, as well as the best thing we can do for others. But it's really important to make sure that, the goal is helping others. Reaching enlightenment is the means to bring that about. So in this chapter, there's just a brief explanation of bodhicitta and the two types of bodhicitta, which are aspirational or aspiring bodhicitta, which is the wish to become enlightened, to help all living beings. And the second type of bodhicitta is engaging bodhicitta, which is where you go beyond just wishing to reach enlightenment, but you start doing what you have to do to reach enlightenment. You start going in that direction. And what you have to do is summarized in the 6 perfections. 6 perfections. So somebody who has engaging bodhicitta is actively engaged in practicing the 6 perfections, cultivating those. And this chapter also has many verses, beautiful verses about the benefits of bodhicitta, how wonderful it is, how fantastic it is. For example, one verse says it's an extraordinary jewel of the mind, and its birth is an unprecedented wonder. So reading these verses, we are inspired to cultivate this state of mind and work for enlightenment. Okay, then chapter 2 is called confessing negativities. So in addition to cultivating bodhicitta, which is a very beautiful state of mind, a wonderful state of mind, there are other things we need to do to succeed in our wish to reach enlightenment. And one is to purify negativities. We have karma we created in the past, this life, previous lives, some of which is negative. Actions of killing, stealing, harming others, and so on. So we're still carrying with us the seeds, the imprints of our past misdeeds. And we also have the tendencies to do those actions again, or even just thinking about them can come up in our mind and mess up our mind. And so it's very important that we do purification practice to clear away these negativities, because otherwise they are like obstacles to our progress on the path. So there are verses here in this chapter about confessing and feeling regret and for the negative actions that we've done in the past, and then making the determination to not repeat them. And one of the best practices of purification in our tradition is that of the confession and prostration and confession to the 35 Buddhas, which if you join the session in the morning, that practice was done together. Another important practice is that of Vajrasattva, visualizing the deity of Vajrasattva and reciting the mantra of Vajrasattva. So there's a number of different practices that we do on a daily basis, ideally, to purify our negativities. And we also, another thing that's important to do for the attainment of enlightenment is accumulating merit. So there's practices for accumulating merit. And as I said last night, that's like fuel to be able to get going along the path to enlightenment. And one of the best ways of accumulating merit is by making offerings. So we can do that physically, like we put offerings on our altars, but also mentally, imagining beautiful, beautiful offerings and mentally offering them to the Buddha, or whatever beautiful things you see in nature or in markets and so on. You can also mentally offer all those things to the Buddhas. Chapter 3 is called Completely Upholding the Mind of Enlightenment. So this contains some more practices for accumulating merit, like rejoicing in virtue, goodness of yourself and others. But mainly, most of the chapter involves verses to affirm one's commitment to help sentient beings and work for enlightenment, to help all of them. Also, in this chapter are verses for taking the bodhisattva vow. Okay, so there's actually vows or precepts that we take to really confirm our determination to reach enlightenment and live in accordance with that wish by keeping these bodhisattva vows. Okay, chapter 4 is called Teachings on Conscientiousness. So here he starts off by saying, okay, after making these promises, I'm going to reach enlightenment to help all sentient beings, and taking on these vows, we have to live up to that. We can't just take those vows and make those promises and then not do anything. That would be very unskillful, very wrong to do. So we need to be aware of afflictive emotions in our minds that could come up and interfere with our commitment and our practice, such as laziness, of course, that's one, but also anger and attachment and self-centeredness. Lots of disturbing emotions can come up in our mind and then obstruct us from continuing on this path. So in this chapter, he talks about the disastrous consequences that would occur if we don't follow through with our commitment. And he exhorts us to refrain from non-virtue, practice virtue, and pay attention to our mind. Watch our mind and notice what kind of afflictions are coming up. And then he talks about all the various faults of afflictions. He says, these are our real enemy. This is actually a great chapter, a wonderful chapter about the faults of our afflictive emotions, and to recognize that our real enemy isn't out there, those nasty people, those difficult people, those annoying people out there. Our real enemy is right here inside of our own mind. That's what we need to overcome. That's what we need to fight. But right at the end of the chapter, he talks about how, in fact, these delusions are not inherently existing. They're like illusions. They're empty of inherent existence. So we shouldn't be afraid of them. We shouldn't fear our disturbing emotions, which does happen. I know, and I see that in myself when actually they can come up quite strong and they look really scary. But remembering, even impermanence, even not understanding emptiness, but impermanence, that they are transitory. They come and they go. They're not always there. And they're not solid things, that can harm us. Like bears or cougars. That's the kind of enemies we have around here. Not enemies, I shouldn't say. No, I take that back. They're not enemies. But, if you meet a bear on the path and the bear looks angry and ferocious, then it could be quite scary. But our internal, afflictive emotions, they can't harm us in the same way. They don't have claws and sharp teeth or guns or, whatever, petrol bombs, gas bombs. So they can't harm us in that kind of way. They're just appearances in our mind, like clouds, like, things that come and go. That's really helpful to understand that they can't really harm us from their own side. So we shouldn't be afraid of them. And they are transitory. Okay. Then chapter 5 is called Guarding Introspection. So this teaches how to cultivate mindfulness and introspection. Mindfulness, paying attention to what's going on in our mind, and introspection is being able to identify what mental factors, mental states are harmful and what are not harmful, so that we can notice and recognize the disturbing emotions and work on them. And this chapter also explains the perfection number 2, which is the perfection of, sometimes it's called morality, but I prefer ethics or ethical conduct. So it's a little unclear what happened to the first perfection, the perfection of giving. It's not explicitly explained in any of the chapters, although in the last chapter, chapter 10, there are many, many verses related to giving. Imagining giving sentient beings whatever they need. But it's not sort of explicitly explained anywhere. So he mainly starts with perfection number 2, perfection of ethical conduct. So that's contained in chapter 5. And then chapter 6 is a big one. You can see each chapter kind of gets longer than the previous ones. They get longer and longer as we go along. So Chapter 6 is about patience, or it's sometimes translated as fortitude or forbearance or tolerance, but I'm kind of used to patience, so I like that term. And so this teaches us how to overcome anger. Many, 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 many verses about antidotes to anger. And also the faults of anger, why it's important to overcome anger, manage anger, and then how to do it with various verses, and how to increase our patience or fortitude. So that's a fantastic chapter. And Venerable's book called Working with Anger, I think, is mainly based on this chapter. And then, so that's the third perfection. And then the fourth perfection is joyous effort. So that's explained in chapter 7, teachings on joyous effort. So that teaches us how to overcome laziness, big obstacle on the path, and increase our joyous effort by means of 4 powers. Power of interest or belief, power of steadfastness or stability, power of joy, and the power of relinquishment. So there's a lot in that chapter about that. And then the fifth of the 6 perfections is sometimes it's called concentration or meditative stabilization. So that is explained in chapter 8. That's the largest chapter of the whole text, 187 verses. And mainly it's talking about how to overcome attachment, especially attachment to the body, because that's a big hindrance in the attempt to develop concentration, concentrating the mind. We try to concentrate our mind on an object, whether it's the breath or image of the Buddha or image of Tara, whatever you're using as your object, the mind has a tendency to wander away, go away from your object, and that interferes with your ability to concentrate. And most of the time when our mind wanders away, it's to objects of attachment. And so that's a big hindrance, something we need to overcome. And so he talks about how to overcome attachment, in particular, attachment to the body. In other words, sexual desire, sexual attachment. So this chapter is kind of controversial, especially for Western women. His Holiness has talked about how he sometimes meets Western women who say, I don't like Shantideva, he's a misogynist. Because this is the chapter where he talks about the woman's body and how unclean, how unattractive it is, and he goes on and on and on and on about that. So His Holiness says, he's talking about women's bodies because the audience, when Shantideva originally delivered this text, the audience were mainly monks. And for monks, big challenge is not getting attached to female bodies. So they need to recognize that the female body is not really attractive as it appears. And His Holiness says, if the audience had been nuns, Shantideva would have talked about men's bodies. So we need to understand it in context. I think it's just best to talk about bodies and not say men or women because, especially now with gay people and bisexual people, any body could be an object of desire, an object of lust and attachment. So just keep it neutral. Bodies, human bodies. And how they appear beautiful and wonderful and attractive, especially when they're all made up with makeup and nice clothes and hair and so on. But if you look under the skin, or even carefully look at the skin, what's really there, you find that not so attractive. In fact, I was just thinking yesterday about how, when people see body parts, they sometimes feel nauseous and vomit or faint, right? So that shows if the body was inherently beautiful and wonderful, fantastic, why would they react that way? Anyway, we don't need to go into that here. But, oh, it does come up later, actually, in chapter 9. We'll get into that. Okay, so then, also in this chapter, chapter 8, towards the end of the chapter, he starts talking about developing bodhicitta using one method, which is called equalizing and exchanging self and others. This is one of the methods for cultivating bodhicitta. And this is the origin of that. It's in this chapter. So it's mainly about how to overcome self-centeredness and how to increase our altruism. Okay, now chapter 9, which is what we're going to focus on here. So this is about the sixth perfection of wisdom. And it has 167 verses, so it's quite long. And many of the verses have to do with refuting the views of non-Buddhists. I think, I don't know exactly like the time and place, but at Nalanda Monastery, maybe in Nalanda Monastery itself, I don't know if there were non-Buddhists who came there to study and were, there, and they would have debates between the Buddhists and the non-Buddhists. I'm not sure if that happened in Nalanda Monastery itself, or maybe in the neighborhood. Maybe there were non-Buddhists around who propounded other views, and so they'd get into debates and arguments about that. But probably at the time of Shantideva, this was a hot topic, like the Buddhist view of things versus the non-Buddhist view of things. There were many people around who did hold these other views. So some of the verses in this chapter are about refuting the views of the non-Buddhists, such as belief in a creator God, that everything, the world and all the beings was created by some kind of God, creator, like Ishvara. Also common was the view of a permanent self or soul or Atman, which is denied by the Buddhists. So there are verses about that. But also there are verses about refuting the views of the non-Madhyamaka schools, such as the mind-only school and the Vibhashika school and so on. So a lot of the verses have to do with that, refuting these other views. And then he also presents how to actually meditate on emptiness, how to understand emptiness with regard to our own self, our I, and other persons, and also other phenomena, all phenomena being empty of inherent existence. So since this retreat, we have a limited amount of time, we don't have time to go through all the verses, and since we're in a retreat, I thought it would be better to focus on those verses that have to do with the actual understanding of emptiness, not so much refuting other schools, but how we assert and meditate on emptiness and selflessness in our own schools. So maybe another time we can go back and do all the verses, but some of them are quite complicated. I think it would take a long time to. And the reason I don't know, the idea of teaching chapter 9 in this retreat sort of popped up in my mind, and I think it may be because when I was in Singapore in the 1990s, I did teach this text. I don't remember how long, probably a year or maybe more, and I did the first 8 verses. I managed to teach all 8 verses, but I knew I couldn't do chapter 9. Sorry, not verses, chapters. I did the first 8 chapters, but chapter 9, because in those days there weren't commentaries available. There was no commentary. And just looking at the verses, I thought, I don't understand this. How can I possibly teach it? But fortunately, we had invited one wonderful Lama, Kirti Tsenchab Rinpoche, to come and teach in our center, just around the time when we were getting to chapter 9. So we asked him to teach chapter 9. So I didn't have to do it. But the time was limited, and as you can see, it's very long. So he didn't really go into all the details. He kind of just gave a summary of it. So all along, and I've had teachings several times from His Holiness where he teaches this text. But again, he teaches it in a very short time, sometimes a few days, sometimes a week or 10 days. But still, he mainly just reads the text and doesn't have time to go into each and every detail. So chapter 9 has always been a kind of mystery for me, a kind of unknown territory. And I thought, well, if I have to teach it here, then I have to study it. That will help me. So I don't want you to think that I'm an expert on chapter 9 and I fully understand every bit of it and I can teach it all. I see it more as an exploration together. We are exploring chapter 9 together. I'm just facilitating that exploration. But yeah, it's pretty complex. And then chapter 10, the last chapter of the text, is called Dedication. And this is really beautiful. It's dedicating the merit of composing the text to all sentient beings. And he's making all these beautiful wishes and aspirations for the benefit of sentient beings. That's the basis for the, I guess you call it a song, the chant used here. Star Spangled Compassion is the nickname for it, but yeah, we can do that at the end. That would be really lovely to do. Okay, so that's an overview, a brief overview of the whole text. And I really hope everyone will have a chance to study this whole text one of these days. Well, it's possible with Venerable Children. She is teaching it, but it'll probably take a couple of years. Okay, so let's start going through the verses of chapter 9. So you can open up that file. The title of that file is 01, Shantideva's chapter 9 with outline. Okay, so again, there's many different translations of this text, and each translator has their own choices about how to translate, so you'll find some differences. By the way, I discovered that this book, the Venerable Children says this is her kind of favorite one, A Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. It's probably one of the first ones that was translated into English. That this is actually available online. You can get a PDF of this. So at the end of this set of notes, there's the link for that. It's from Tibet House in probably India. Oh, Tibet House JP. That looks like Japan. Anyway, it's online and it looks like a legitimate website. So if you don't have a copy already, you can download it from there. So this translation we're using was translated by a Singapore woman, To Suki, and it's quite similar to this other one by Stephen Batchelor, a little bit different. Okay, so the first, and included in this file are outlines from Gyaltsabje's commentary, which I think is helpful, just to have some outline headings that give you some idea of what's happening in each part of the text. So the first verse, 9.1, says, the Muni taught all these branches for the purpose of wisdom. So again, this is coming after the previous 8 chapters in which Shantideva explained the bodhicitta and the first 5 of the 6 perfections and so on. So all the things that Bodhisattva needs to do to get going on the path to awakening, to enlightenment. So in the first line, when it says, the Muni refers to the Buddha, it's another term for Buddha, taught all these branches. So branches, there might be different interpretations, but Gyaltsab Je and Dragpa Gyaltsen say branches refers to all the previously mentioned practices, all the things that came before in this text. Developing bodhicitta, purifying, accumulating merit, practicing the different perfections, and so on. So all those practices that have been explained are for the purpose of wisdom, cultivating wisdom. Some people might want to just jump right into wisdom. I mean, emptiness is like so fascinating, so intriguing. You know, a lot of Westerners are really attracted to Buddhism for that very reason. You know, emptiness. That's something we don't find in other places. So they kind of go right to that. And that's okay. But to really understand emptiness and not just understand it intellectually, but realize it, actually have a realization of emptiness, which is the meaning of wisdom. Wisdom is the wisdom realizing emptiness. We need more than just reading books, hearing teachings, thinking about it. We also need all these other things like purifying our negativities, accumulating merit, living ethically, practicing generosity, learning how to be patient with difficult people, and so on and so forth. And of course, concentration. So we need all of those other practices as foundations for the genuine cultivation of wisdom. Otherwise, it just won't work. It'll just be some intellectual ideas, like a professor in university who can talk about emptiness, but doesn't actually practice it, doesn't actually have it in their heart. And of course, for a bodhisattva aspiring to reach Buddhahood, the motivation is essential. What is our motivation for cultivating wisdom? Is it just to be smart and be able to impress people with your knowledge, your understanding? No, it's to be able to reach Buddhahood, to help all living beings. So that's why we need these two aspects of the path, like the two wings of a bird, method and wisdom. Method includes bodhicitta, compassion, love, all the other perfections, first 5 perfections, wishing to help sentient beings and actively engaged in helping sentient beings as much as possible. Right now, maybe our ability to help sentient beings is limited because of the pandemic. You know, can't go out. I heard from somebody just recently who said she feels kind of frustrated because normally she goes and volunteers at an animal rescue place and a hospice and a homeless shelter, but now she has to, all those things are closed now and she's stuck at home. So the opportunities for actively working for and helping sentient beings are restricted right now. But there's always things we can do, right? Make phone calls, talk to people on the phone, give donations. So, you know, there are ways we can help sentient beings. And of course, working on our spiritual practice. You know, staying at home and studying and meditating and practicing, watching your mind, really trying to develop all these positive qualities for the benefit of sentient beings. So, yeah, there's many, many ways we can work for sentient beings, even from home, even without the opportunities to actually have contact with them. So there's always something. When you think about yogis, like in Tibet, you know, there were lots of yogis who stayed in caves, like Milarepa, and they weren't going out and staying in town and helping people. They were staying in their caves or huts, meditating. But they were doing it with this motivation of wanting to help all sentient beings, wanting to reach enlightenment to help all sentient beings. So that is a way of benefiting sentient beings. We shouldn't feel that we're not doing enough. In fact, just keeping ethics too is a fantastic way of helping sentient beings. My teacher, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, once said that keeping precepts, you know, refraining from killing and stealing and so on, this is social work. This is benefiting sentient beings, because it means that if you make even just one precept of not killing, if you take that precept and you're keeping it, that means all sentient beings are safe. They are not threatened by you. There's no need to fear you, no need to be, to be concerned about being harmed by you. You are benefiting all sentient beings just by making that determination. I'm not going to kill. I'm not going to harm sentient beings. So just that itself is beneficial for all sentient beings. So it's important that we value the practices that we are doing, and feel that, yeah, we are doing a lot to help sentient beings. Anyway, so I got carried away there, but yeah, that I was trying to make the point that it's necessary to progress along the path to awakening, to enlightenment, to have these two aspects of method on one side and wisdom on the other. If we have one without the other, it won't work. If we only have method, I mean, that's wonderful to have compassion and love and work to help sentient beings and so on. But with that alone, we won't be able to reach enlightenment. We won't even be able to get out of samsara. We'll be stuck in samsara ourselves. We need wisdom just to get ourselves out of samsara and to enlightenment. So wisdom is needed to complement method. Method is needed to complement wisdom, as I was just saying. Otherwise, wisdom is dry and cold and, there's no warmth, no juice there. So the whole purpose of reaching enlightenment, again, is benefiting others. So then he goes on to say, therefore, those who desire to pacify suffering should generate wisdom. So whether it's our own suffering or the suffering of others, the solution to suffering is wisdom, the wisdom, understanding, emptiness. Because there's also different kinds of wisdom. It can be wisdom of understanding impermanence, wisdom understanding karma, law of cause and effect. But here we're talking about wisdom understanding emptiness, the true nature of all things. That's the main wisdom that eliminates suffering, eliminates the causes of suffering, enables us to be free of samsara and reach full enlightenment, full awakening. Okay, then now we go on to how to develop wisdom. So the next verse, 9.2, introduces the two truths. So first two lines say the concealer, in brackets the conventional, and the ultimate are asserted to be the two truths. So the two truths. This is a very difficult topic, and Shantideva doesn't say much about it. So that's why that was actually the main reason why I made these supplementary notes, because I'm sure like the Abbey residents are quite familiar with the two truths, but some of the people watching, listening online may not be. And even for those who've heard it before, it doesn't hurt to go through it again. So now let's go back to the supplementary notes on page 2. We're just going to go through the two truths and try to understand those better. Because it's really important also to make sense of some of the later verses. They won't make sense if you don't understand the two truths. So, of the different philosophical schools, Vibhashika, Sutrantika, Chittamatra, Madhyamaka, each would have their own way of explaining the two truths. So we're going to jump right into the Madhyamaka, in particular the Madhyamaka Prasangika way of explaining the two truths. It is good to go back and learn the two truths according to the other schools. And there's a wonderful book about that, Appearance and Reality by Guy Newland. It's very difficult, but it's written in a kind of modern, contemporary style that we can understand, we can relate to. So he explains the two truths according to each of the four main schools. Okay, so according to the school that our teachers follow, and it seems Shantideva also is the follower of the Madhyamaka Prasangika, which means Madhyamaka means middle way, and then Prasangika is translated as consequentialists. So to understand the meaning of that, you have to study a bit, but I'll just stick with Prasangika. Okay, so the two truths. This is a simple way of explaining the two truths. The two truths are ultimate and conventional. Ultimate truth is emptiness. Emptiness of inherent existence. This is the actual correct way in which everything exists. So it's the true nature of everything, whatever exists. Its true nature is emptiness of inherent existence. And everything else, other than that, everything that's not emptiness, are conventional truths. So that's a simple way of dividing up the two truths. But we need to understand what is the meaning of inherent existence, because that's probably not part of our everyday vocabulary when we're sitting at the dinner table. What do you think about inherent existence? Do you think it's true or not? So probably not. We probably don't use it unless we're, monastics like here. We do talk about it, but ordinary people. So inherent existence is a term. And in the box, I put some synonyms, other terms used interchangeably with inherent existence. So inherent existence, also true existence. I'm giving these because they do come up in various books, various texts. So it's good to know that they all have the same meaning. Inherent existence, true existence, ultimate existence, objective existence. So if you come across any of those terms, they're all talking about the same thing. They're just synonyms, at least from this school's point of view. Not from other schools, but this school. We're just focusing on Prasangikas here. And there's many more. If you want to know more, you can go to page 36 in Meditation on Emptiness by Jeffrey Hopkins. There's a whole page. I can't remember how many there are, but they're all different terms for the same thing. Now you may wonder, why do they have to have so many different terms? Why don't they just use the same ones? I think it may be because different authors, Buddhism has been around for 2,500 years, and Madhyamaka has been around for about 2,000 years. So different authors will use different terms. That's their choice. They have the right to choose that. So even though they do use different terms, it's good to know they have the same meaning. But what does it mean, inherent existence? Okay, so the next paragraph explains that. So Prasangikas say everything is empty of inherent existence. So what is inherent existence? So we have to understand inherent existence doesn't exist. Okay, according to this school, not other schools, but this school says inherent existence is something false, something imaginary, something fabricated. It doesn't actually exist, and yet we see it. It appears to us. So in Buddhist philosophy, they often talk about things that exist and things that don't exist, and the difference between them. So they often use examples of non-existence. The classic one is horns of a rabbit, because somebody once saw a rabbit out in the field with the ears sticking up and thought they were horns. Oh, look, that rabbit has horns. So that was not true. There are no horns on the head of a rabbit, but the person thought that. So that's an example of something that doesn't exist and yet can still appear. And I was thinking this morning, we have an American version of this, pie in the sky. We have that expression, right? Pie in the sky. I don't know the origin of it, but pie in the sky is something that doesn't exist. Pies just don't appear. That would be great if you could just think of a pie and there would be an apple pie, a blueberry pie, just appearing in space. So that's something impossible, something doesn't exist, just a fantasy. Okay. So inherent existence is like that. It's like pie in the sky. Doesn't actually exist. Okay, then it goes on to say, if a table, for example, were inherently existent, it would have its own way of existing, independent of everything else, independent of causes and conditions, independent of parts, independent of being labeled by the mind. So the problem is our mind does see things as if they were inherently existing, but in fact they're not. But if things did exist inherently, this is how they would be. The table, for example, it would exist independently, all by itself, cut off from everything else, not dependent on anything else, not dependent on causes and conditions. The table wouldn't have to be made by a carpenter from wood that came from a tree in the forest, cut down by a logger, and so on and so forth. So those things wouldn't be necessary. The table could just exist all by itself, independent of parts. It wouldn't have to be composed of different parts. And mental labeling. Now that's more difficult to understand, but we see this collection of parts put together as a result of causes and conditions, and we call it table. We just name it table, at least in English. People of other languages would have their own labels, their own names. But the point is, we give a name to this object, and then we think that's how it is. It is that. This is a table. So this mode of existence, inherent existence, is completely false. It's only fabricated by ignorance and projected onto things. So Buddhism says we have ignorance, this ignorance believing in inherent existence in our minds from birth, from conception, from past lives, from beginningless time. Now that's hard to understand if you're new to this idea, but this is a Buddhist explanation. Our minds have always existed, and ignorance that believes in inherent existence has always existed in our minds. So we're born with it. We don't learn it from our parents or teachers or anybody else. It's already there, inborn, innate. And it causes us to see things in this way, in this false way, as if they existed inherently, independently, and we've never freed ourselves from this. So every day of our lives, every minute, every second, we are seeing things that way, as if they are inherently existing. And we don't do it deliberately, okay? It's not our fault. It's not something we do consciously and deliberately. It's just our innate, inborn, instinctive, gut level, you might say, way of seeing things, as if they existed that way. So things do exist, like the table. Okay, there is a table here, but it doesn't exist like that. It's not inherently or independently existing. Instead, the way it exists is what we usually call it conventionally. It exists conventionally, which means it depends for its existence on other things. It depends on the causes and conditions, the carpenter, the wood, the logger who cut the tree down, the factory, or what do they call it? Mill. Okay, the mill that cut the tree into slices, planks, and the people working, the machinery. So many, 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 many factors and causes and conditions for this table to come into existence. And then the parts. It's made up of parts. Everything is made of parts. Even if you have a molded table, like a plastic table that's made in a mold, so you can't actually break it up into parts. But it still has parts in terms of the tiny molecules and atoms of plastic that are molded together. It can still be broken down into parts, at least mentally. So everything has parts. And then on being conceptually labeled. Whoever created or invented tables and that name, and they made something that they could put their dinner plate on or their book on or whatever, and they said, table, this is a table. And then from then on, everybody started using that term, table. But it's not a table from its own side. The table didn't say, I am a table. You call me table, that's my name. That doesn't come from the table itself. It comes from human minds, human beings giving that name, that label onto this object. So the Prasangikas say that the table and everything else is merely labeled or imputed by the mind onto a basis of imputation, which is a collection of parts and particles. When we search among the parts and particles for a table, we can't find even a tiny particle that we can point to and say, that's the table. So we take apart the table and look at all the parts, even down to the tiniest, but we can't really do that unless you have those kind of machines that break atoms down. What are they called? Anyway, huh? Anyway, even if we could break it down into the tiniest particles and we looked at all those parts and particles, none of them would be a table. None of them would be a table. So this is something you can try on your own in the break time. I mean, not literally, but, don't go bang. Take an axe and chop up your table. You don't need to do that. But just mentally, take something apart and look at all the parts. Think about all the parts and say, is that the table? Is that a table? Or use any object, like a car or a piece of cloth or rug or something that's also made of parts, all these individual threads that are woven together so tightly, it looks like one solid thing, but it's not. It's made up of all these parts. So think about the parts of an object. Look at them one by one and ask, is that the object? Is that the table? Is that the car? Is that the cloth? Interesting. So table, but that doesn't mean table doesn't exist. It does exist, but merely labeled, merely imputed by the mind onto those parts and particles. So that's just a kind of rough explanation of the two truths. Emptiness of inherent existence being the ultimate truth, everything else being conventional truth. But to be more precise, there are definitions. So in the box, bottom of the page, there are actual definitions of the two truths, starting with ultimate truth. So the criteria or way of distinguishing what is a truth, what is a conventional truth, what is an ultimate truth, depends on the kind of mind, mental state that knows it or realizes it or finds it, as it's explained here. So the definition of an ultimate truth, coming from the philosophical text, is an object found by a valid cognizer distinguishing the final nature of phenomena. So the term valid cognizer, Venerable usually uses reliable cognizer. Some other translations are ideal cognizer. So this is a mind or mental state that is correct, that sees its object in a correct way and in a certain, definite way, such that afterwards you feel sure about what you saw or heard or understood. We have these all the time, actually, when we see an object, like this gong, I think you call it here, gong sitting on the table. We see it, and hopefully we all recognize it as a gong. And afterwards, if somebody says, did you see the gong, or where is the gong, we would be able to say, it's there. It's in that place. I saw it. It's there. Okay, so most of our experiences, most of our perceptions are correct, are valid. We see an object, we know what it is. Afterwards, we are sure of what we saw. We can tell other people, yes, I did see it. I know it. It's there. It was that. But this here, it says, a valid cognizer distinguishing the final nature of phenomena. So this is a state of mind that only exists in certain beings, probably not, I know it's not me, but beings who are called Arya. An Arya, Sanskrit term, means sometimes translated as superior or noble being. This is a person who has directly realized emptiness, who has achieved that state of directly seeing, directly experiencing emptiness. And so when they have this experience of directly realizing emptiness, they're in a state of meditative equipoise. That means their mind is fully absorbed in a state of concentration, focusing on emptiness. And that's actually the only thing they see at that time. The only thing appearing to their mind at that time is emptiness of inherent existence. So that's quite a high achievement. One has to do a lot of work, study, reflection, meditation, developing concentration, and so on to get to that point. But there are beings who do that. And so that's what qualifies an Arya, criteria of being an Arya. So that state of mind in the person, an Arya, that mind that directly sees emptiness, correctly, directly, is what's meant here by this valid cognizer distinguishing the final nature of phenomena. So that mind sees the true nature of everything, true nature of all phenomena. So the object of that mind, what is seen by that mind, what is experienced by that mind, that is ultimate truth. That's the meaning of ultimate truth. So it's kind of a chicken and egg situation, like, well, we can't really know, what an ultimate truth is until we've attained that state of mind, and Arya's wisdom of meditative equipoise, realizing emptiness. But we can still, even though we're not at that point yet, we can still think about it and talk about it, discuss it, meditate on it. And that's the only way we can finally, eventually reach that state of mind where we do directly see emptiness. But until that time, we don't really understand emptiness. We don't really experience emptiness as it actually exists. But there are those who do. Buddhas, Arya Bodhisattvas, Arya hearers, solitary realists, there are beings who do have that experience. So we can learn from them, be inspired by them, and eventually reach that state of ourselves. So it goes on to say, an ultimate truth is an emptiness, the lack of any phenomenon's inherent existence. And examples, the lack of inherent existence of a table, of a body, of a person, a car, and so on. So this thing, emptiness, or ultimate truth, sometimes people might get the idea that it's somewhere out in space. It's very mystical and magical and far away. And that's not true. That's our Western kind of fantasy. Emptiness is everywhere. It's the true nature of everything that exists. Our bodies, okay, emptiness is the true nature of our own bodies and every part of our body, our stomach. Now, some people might be having an empty stomach right now, but emptiness doesn't mean just empty in the sense of not having any food in it and hungry, but it's emptiness of inherent existence. It's a special kind of emptiness. So it's the true nature of our bodies, of our minds, of the table, everything in this room, all the furniture, the lights, the tables and chairs and so on, everything outside, all the trees and mountains and forests, buildings and so on, everything, whatever exists, has emptiness as its true nature, its actual mode of existence. So we don't find emptiness by just spacing out and going somewhere else, going to another planet, another universe. But we find it right here where we are in our meditation. So it's time to stop. We didn't get to conventional truths, but we'll do that tomorrow. So for questions, we don't really have time, but if people have questions, they can send them, put them in the chat room, or also email. Yeah, and then you can give them to me later. Actually, there was one question left from last night about the Tara practice. Back to Tara. The question is the moon disk behind Tara's head, or is she seated on a moon disk? She's seated on a moon disk. Most deities have a seat made of a lotus, kind of a flat, spread out lotus. And on top of the lotus is a flat disk of light, which is representing the moon. Sometimes they have a sun as well. Buddha Shakyamuni sits on a sun and a moon. So the moon is said to represent bodhicitta. The lotus represents renunciation, determination to be free of samsara. Moon represents bodhicitta. So she has a moon disk underneath her. It did kind of make me wonder, because actually white Tara, there's a practice of white Tara. White Tara is for long life. And in the white Tara practice, it's said that she has a full moon behind her, kind of, yeah. So that's true for white Tara, but I never heard of that for green Tara. So it's under her. But all deities are depicted with a kind of aura around them, around their bodies, also around their heads. So that just represents the light emanating from them, the light of their wisdom and other qualities. And also they're made of light. That I didn't mention that last night, but when we visualize deities, their bodies are not solid like ours, but they're made of light, transparent, and every aspect of the visualization is made of light as well, including the lotus, the moon, the jewelry, and so on. It's all made of light. And there's somebody, I think, maybe also the Tom, when you did this sadhana this morning, there may have been some confusion because it said at her heart, there's a hum, and later it says there's a Tom. So people might wonder, wait a minute, how can there be two things there? Well, there are different ways of working with that, but I think for now, just think of them, you could think of one in front of the other, like this, or next to each other. Don't worry about it. Don't get hung up on it. In Tibetan, you visualize one inside the other, but that works with Tibetan letters. They often have these little circles. You visualize one inside the circle of the other. But don't worry about that. I kind of wonder if your visualization is really that fine-tuned that you're able to see clearly these syllables at your heart. So it's enough to just think they're there. Both the Tom and the Hum are there in your heart, or in the heart of Tara, rather. Okay, so we'll stop there for now.